Welcome back to Live, Lead, Legacy, the podcast where we spotlight the leaders who are living with purpose, leading with integrity, and leaving a legacy of impact in their communities and industries. I'm your host, Carlos Luna. Today on Live, Lead, Legacy, I'm joined by a powerhouse in legal tech and operational excellence, Bridgette Ferraro. She is the CEO and majority owner of iCopy Legal. We're unpacking what it takes to lead boldly, build culture, and scale a mission-driven business in a highly regulated industry. Let's give a big Live, Lead, Legacy welcome to Bridgette Ferraro. Hey, Bridgette, welcome to Live, Lead, Legacy. How's it going?
Great. Thanks for having me, Carlos.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. I've been looking forward to our conversation for quite some time. You and I met, for those individuals that are watching this episode, we met at a mutual industry event. Oh, gosh, what would you say, like a few months back, right? Maybe
Yeah.
it's been longer, but it was a great event that I saw you speak at. And I have to tell you, from the very first time that I saw you speak, you have this spark, which is really cool. You just have a lot of great charisma. You have a knack of drawing people into what you're saying, really investing themselves into the message. And so I want to give you that bit of affirmation today.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Now, have you been doing public speaking for a big portion of your career? Is that a personal passion of yours? Is it something that you've worked on for a long time?
I have always had some level of having to do public speaking in my role. My mom would probably say I started doing some level of speaking when I was 7. I was flying on my own across the country to visit between my parents and would make friends on the airplane very fast.
So you've always been, I don't know if extrovert is the right term for you, but you certainly have always been okay with socializing and getting your message across.
Yeah, very chatty.
Good, good. Well, I've learned that you are now the majority owner of iCopy Legal. By the way, congratulations to you on that. That's exciting.
Thank you. I never would have thought, 5 years ago that I would be interested in or know anything about M&A of any sort, but not only doing a deal within iCopy, but then my own deal to gain majority has definitely been a fun ride and a learning curve.
You know, a lot of people get really intimidated by the idea of entrepreneurship. They get really intimidated by the idea of having to fly on their own, if you will, and depend on, stability for the company ultimately falls on them, right? And they get really, really intimidated by that. I'm curious to know, Bridgette, what lit that entrepreneurial spark in your life?
I think the very first experience, as cliche as it might sound, was a lemonade stand on a golf course. I had a really good friend in elementary school that lived on a golf course, and we were hanging out all the time over the summer, and we were like, we're gonna make money so that we can go buy ice cream. And set up on the golf course and sold lemonade. And sometimes we had like fresh strawberries that like we started like figuring out how we could diversify our items.
That's so neat. That's so neat. So it started very early on for you then.
Yep.
You know, as an entrepreneur myself, sometimes I have to tell you, I still struggle with what is that term, imposter syndrome. Have you ever heard of that term?
Oh yeah. Yep. That's a common one that is in my daily life, I would say.
How do you deal with those feelings of inadequacy or maybe sometimes self-doubt? I know that, as an entrepreneur and really as a business leader in general, you have to become your own biggest fan, right? Your own biggest cheerleader, if you will. You've got to be a self-starter. When those thoughts of self-doubt, when those thoughts of, man, what am I doing here, tend to creep in, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I've been super blessed over the years to have people in my life that I can go to and use as a sounding board, honestly. Like the go-to phrase for me is meter me, okay? I'm coming into the conversation and I need you to meter me, my thoughts, where I'm at in this moment. So having really great community has been extremely helpful. Honestly, I think I struggle with being my own self cheerleader. My husband has always been my biggest cheerleader, I would say, and helping make sure that if I'm having those down days, I would say I heard something recently from a fellow entrepreneur that as an entrepreneur, your days are in thirds. So you have a third that are really, really difficult and you're questioning, what am I doing here? And you've got a third where you're okay. You're in the groove. And you've got a third where you're just like on the top of the mountain. You're riding
Yeah.
the roller coaster, like you're on the high. And most people live more so in sevenths. And so just that fluctuation as an entrepreneur, I would say having people in your corner is one of the most important.
I had a mutual friend of ours on the podcast recently, Sherry Starkey, and we were talking about, the delineation between work and home, and sometimes how that line tends to blur these days, right? And there's a ton of overlap. People bring, their personal lives to work, and their work oftentimes follows them home into their personal life. As an entrepreneur, that's definitely the case, right? And there doesn't really seem to be really a delineation of the two separate pieces of your life. And sometimes they become one, very oftentimes. As an entrepreneur, do you find yourself feeling like, you've heard that term, it's just business, right? I find myself oftentimes, Bridgette, feeling like, well, not so much. It's not just business. Like, this is actually a personal passion of mine. I care about this. So it very much is personal to me, at certain levels, particularly when I'm dealing with issues of excellence, right? If I'm trying to level up in a specific service or a specific protocol that I know needs to be dialed in and tuned in for excellence, I take that very personally, right? And it becomes a personal mission of mine. How do you deal with that bifurcation in your life? Or would you say, yeah, I experienced a similar effect in my own life. And how do you walk through that? How do you navigate it?
Yeah, I would say it's a bit of a buzz topic to talk about work-life balance, right? And not only for entrepreneurs, but any high-level executive, director, even, salaried individual. I would say that work-life balance doesn't really exist. We have work-life integration, especially with how much we are able to work from home, which isn't the case for everyone, but the freedom that we have in technology, for me, it's not about like having that separation and it really does come together, but also talking to people about that because I think that some of that imposter syndrome or that guilt, especially for working moms, comes from this cultural piece where you are kind of expected to have work-life balance and to have it be separate and to have it be business, not personal. And so I love to talk about actually being countercultural to that thought and how it's helpful to talk to other people about that point exactly. It is personal, and it's okay that it's personal to you as an entrepreneur, as a leader. Um, and arguably, if you're an entrepreneur and it's not personal, maybe you need another thing.
Yeah. I love that you made that point. I was about to say, do you even want it at that
Yeah.
point? Like, if you're not emotionally vested in what you're doing as an entrepreneur, right? Sometimes it's really just that emotion that's going to push you forward, that's going to propel you upward. And if you don't have that, do you really want it? So that's a great point. So, we work in the insurance industry. I've been in the industry now for over 20 years, Bridgette. I've loved every minute of it. I fell in love with the insurance process very early on. Many know my story. I received a call from a claimant who was despondent and was suicidal at the time. And in that moment, I realized that what we do for a living, as day to day as the task might be, actually could have some very material implications on another person's life, right? And so I quickly became snagged into the insurance monster, if you will. Many would say, Bridgette, and maybe that's just my genetic makeup, but many would say that this industry is definitely a male dominated space. I've heard that comment many, many times. Tell us a little bit about your journey as a woman CEO in this space. Do you consider it to be male dominated? What do we do to encourage other women owners or other women entrepreneurs to come and work in the insurance space? Tell us about your journey.
Yeah, I fell into it. So, my previous role, I was an executive director of a nonprofit and met up with someone who was in the industry and got connected to iCopy through an industry conference, actually. We were founded originally by attorneys that were fed up with others overpromising and underdelivering and really wanted it to be a service for their own firm. And so she got involved, and we're getting coffee, and she's talking about operational problems that they're having. At the time, I consider myself a growth strategist. So I actually have a consulting business. Doesn't really have active clients at this point because iCopy is my full focus. But I took iCopy as a contract for 90 days on the side and was like way too cocky in my 20s. Said, give me X amount of dollars and I'll solve most of these problems, right? At the end of that is when I started as essentially head of operations and then moved into the CEO role. But um, we ended up launching our tech product in January of 2019. And I, for a very long time, kind of lived in a bubble with iCopy, right? Like we're working with our clients and things like that. And I would say in recent years, as I am speaking more and going to more events and industry things, it's industry specific, but also in general, being a female CEO is just a world where I live as a minority. And I think for this industry in general, having young people get involved, and specifically for females, the number one thing that I have heard is I fell into it. I got invited, right? And that's part of my story too. I had someone who came to me and was like, I think you would be good for this. And I think that's a lot of people's story as I talk to other leaders in this space is I fell into it, or I had a parent or a family member. This specific industry has that like invitation community invite aspect to it. And so I think the number one thing is don't underplay the value that your invitation has to someone. And I think that's true in all areas of life, but it's a trend I've seen specifically in insurance where a lot of people are here because they were invited.
Yeah, I absolutely can agree with that. I think that everybody comes through that door oftentimes unintentionally, and through the invitation of someone else. It's really after you enter the room, it's up to you what you do with that, right? And boy, I'm really hoping that there are some young, aspiring women entrepreneurs that are watching your story that will be inspired to take the next step. That's my hope. So,
I would say, as much as you have the opportunity in this industry to share your story, there's so much opportunity to grow, especially for those who are, I think in Rise, which is an awesome organization that's intentionally focusing on the next generation in the industry, it's 40 under 40, right? Or well, whatever that is. So under 40 coming, even if you're like considering a career change, right? Like you don't have to be early career. You could still be mid-career. And there's so many opportunities within the industry where we need good people.
I may have aged out of Rise professionals many years ago, but that's a different topic. We won't talk about that. We won't talk about Bruno.
My girls love that song.
So, Bridgette, a common tale in our industry, and I'm sure you've been around long enough to hear that M&A is very prominent in what we do, right? In the insurance space, it happens all the time. Consolidation happens on a daily basis. Interestingly, as organizations scale, and we've seen it in every vertical that I can think of, every vertical of the claims management process. I've seen it in the TPA space. I've seen it in the managed care space. I've seen it in the medical bill review space. As companies scale, quality always tends to be impacted by it. And I'm not just talking about through the transition. I'm talking long term, to the point to where good brands that have had a significant amount of goodwill in our space, that brand value has deteriorated significantly. So, as a CEO of an organization that's thriving, that's growing, what are your thoughts about effectively scaling, right, while maintaining your commitment to quality and maintaining your commitment to essentially what you hold true today, to those core values that you hold true today as a business?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the area of focus as we look to continue to scale and grow for us that helps us ensure that we are maintaining that quality with growth is technology. How are we innovating within our own tech stack and other tools that are within the ecosystem in order to make sure that we can scale appropriately and not lose quality in the process? Because one of our biggest value propositions is that we are people first and tech forward. There's so much innovation and technology happening within litigation management in general. For us, there is a huge component of people and making sure that you have a person that is dedicated to your cases, to your files, making sure that you have a person you can call and you're going to get an answer within hours. As far as the quality control on, let's say, like the end work product, the biggest thing for us is communication because you don't know what you don't know. And oftentimes what we provide is a very frustrating part of the process, right? Procuring medical records, actually having to do the follow-ups, and those things are not, they're not fun, and they often get put on the back burner when it comes to your priority list, right? So when we're working with clients that are used to having a vendor where they still have to do some level of follow-up, even though they're not even doing the records retrieval themselves, that's a huge quality piece for us that we will make sure at scale never goes away.
I love it. I love it. So I'm a firm believer, Bridgette, that a star can only shine as bright as their supporting cast, right? And so I'm a big believer in the team that you assemble around you to help you execute on excellence, to help you execute and retain that focus on those core values as you scale. Walk us through your personal approach through hiring, culture building, and then ultimately, what is your focus as you endeavor to retain that talent within your organization? You know this, that attrition and turnover can be a very costly endeavor for businesses, right? It's a big source of leakage if you lose a significant amount of institutional knowledge. What is your approach to making sure that you hire the right people? Once they're there, they're treated right, they're excited to be there, and ultimately don't decide to move on to another place, right?
Yeah. So the number one thing in hiring that is fairly new in regards to when I took over majority in December. So one of the first things I did is move us to a 4-day work week. So having 4 10-hour days and having a path to continue to increase health insurance. So from a from a recruitment standpoint, making sure that when we say we are people first, that starts with the inside, that we care about the people who are here and who choose to join our team, understanding like there are a lot of jobs out there. And the fact that you choose to be a part of the iCopy team is something that we take seriously and honor in the way that we're going to treat you as someone who's a part of the team. So we offer a lot of flexibility. We have a lot of parents. And so the reality is, even if you're hourly and you need to go to a soccer game or go to a doctor's appointment, there is a lot of flexibility. The end goal is we trust you, we appreciate you, and as long as you get your stuff done, there are some parameters within that, but really building a culture that's attractive to people who want work-life integration.
I love it. Work-life integration. I like that term. Oftentimes, when we find the need to micromanage, you start to think, or at least you should start to think, do I have the right person in this place, right? If I have to interact, if I have to interject, if I have to oversee this process this closely, do I have the right person in the right role? So I think that you speak some very, very true words there. It's inevitable, Bridgette, as you manage a business, as you lead a business, right? Life does life things, and sometimes crisis comes your way, whether it's something that is, weather related. I mean, we just saw catastrophic reports out of Texas with all the flooding. My heart goes out to each and every family that was impacted by that, each and every business that was impacted by that. It was just horrific, right? Have you had any moments in your career as a business leader, as a CEO, where you've had to lead through crisis, and how did you navigate that internally? And then also, what type of guidance did you provide to your team during that time?
Yeah. A couple of things come to mind. The most personal one, I have a really good family friend. It's actually my mom's best friend that came to work for the business. And while she was on the team, she suddenly passed away. She had had some
Mm,
complications. And that was kind of like an internal crisis moment to be able to support the team and also support her family. So I was traveling, visiting clients, not at home when I received the phone call because she was going to be late for work. So we were one of the first calls from the family letting us know that she wouldn't be in for the day, and then immediately trying to figure out how to get support, especially because of the nature of what we did. And she passed quickly after a procedure. And so then
mm,
having family ask questions of us and lean on us for resources just as you're navigating thoughts around that. So I would say that was, and as an owner and CEO, that wasn't something I was prepared for. I don't know that you like come in thinking about having processes or resources in place in the event of losing a team member until you've lost a team member. And then you figure out quickly like, oh, this needs to be a part of our holistic package so that we have support for our people and we can know what to do swiftly to support a family that's having to deal with that and go through it. And then just on a personal note, it was someone who'd been in my life since I was 7. So not just a team member, but also a family friend, and
mm.
wading through all of that. And I would say now we actually just had our first ever in-person staff retreat here in Colorado. And there's a statue that you put locks on. It's kind of like you write your name and you put a lock on it. And she had come to visit and actually had a lock on there. So a lot of the team that came knew her.
Mm.
And we were able to like do that together and have a moment of remembrance and also pointing back to we are people first in all that we do. Another component where we have to deal with crisis quite a bit, we actually have a pretty large international team that's based out of the Philippines, and there's different disasters that happen at a higher rate, I would say, than the disasters that we've also had to experience in the United States. So we had some staff that were affected by the tornadoes in the Midwest not too long ago, and then flooding and tsunamis and sometimes volcanoes in the Philippines. And so different disasters or natural disasters that are happening around the world that impact our team. It's built in that we know that there's a lot of grace whenever those things come up and making sure that we are on the front lines of support and whatever that looks like, whether it's time off, potentially extra funds. We have a bit of a system where we have a earmarked budget for people. So if someone is experiencing some sort of crisis, we've had severe medical things that have happened to spouses of team members or medical things that have happened to team members. And that's a part of our culture and our budget specifically. There is a line item to support financially. And then a part of the culture to support with grace, empathy, and time.
You can never undervalue or underestimate the power of empathy, right? And I love that you exhibit such compassion for the people on your team and the people that ultimately, are the key to the success of iCopy, both here domestically and internationally. So that's neat. And by the way, I'm so sorry for your loss of your family member and your team member. That I know that's all it really hits you hard, particularly when it's somebody that you work with on a regular basis, that you speak with on a regular basis. So I'm so sorry for that loss.
Thank you.
The vertical that you work in, Bridgette, is very tech heavy. It relies heavily on technology. If you had to look into a crystal ball and look into the future, what do you see for iCopy Legal? And more interestingly, what do you see for the legal slash insurance services sector, in the next 5 years? I know We've been talking a lot at industry conferences about artificial intelligence, but is there other technology that's being developed that we don't know of yet that you think, really is going to become pretty prominent in the next 5 to 10 years in that space?
I don't know that it's something that we don't know about. I don't know that we talk about enough the opportunities that there are in leveraging APIs within all of the systems and solutions that we have. I think the biggest thing that's going to impact records retrieval and kind of like documents in general in the next 5 years is what the language learning models are able to produce from a summarization standpoint, like making it really smart and interactive. I think that there is a lot of time to be gained for people who are doing document review of any way, shape, or form. I think we are going to see exponential time savings and quality in that tool as it continues to advance in the coming years. I also think there's an interesting shift within APIs in the way documents and records in general are shared. And so as our systems get smarter, and we're leveraging more APIs within the ecosystem, I think the ability to bring down a bit of the balloon that is documents and the transfer of information and how many people are touching it and the timeline and the cost will have the ability to start to shrink over the next 5 years because a lot of us in the industry are moving towards just trying to create a tighter ecosystem and connection points to shorten those turnaround times and decrease cost by leveraging technology.
Got it. Got it. So, Bridgette, one of the fun things that I've noticed about you is that you really enjoy, how would you say this, helping others around you at any given time really see the joy in the room, which I love that about you. I feel like you bring this great sense of optimism, happiness, joy into any room that you walk into. And I've been in a few rooms that you've been in, and I've seen that effect very, very vividly, which is awesome. Right. And I'm always curious about my guests' backstories, if you will. Right. Would you indulge us today and tell us a little bit about, your upbringing as a child? You talked about how when you were 7, you really liked to talk to people, you liked to socialize in public settings, which is great. But tell us a little bit further about your life as a kid into maybe your high school years and early college years.
Yeah, my parents had me very young. So I am an only child between my parents, and my dad is now retired Air Force. And they split when I was about 6. So I lovingly and jokingly, kind of jokingly, say that I got the best of both worlds, that they split at that age because I got the military life of moving around and different experiences and locations because I spent holidays and summers and things like that wherever my dad was because he moved about every 3 years. And the consistency of growing up in Indiana with my mom, we still moved a bit. So I went to a couple of different schools. And so I have a sweater, actually, it says Indiana Roots, and people find out I'm from Indiana and they're like, oh, you're a Hoosier. I'm like, definitely not a Hoosier. I grew up with most of my years in West Lafayette, Indiana, which is where Purdue University is, and I'm a
Yes.
Boilermaker. I went to Purdue. So I basically bleed black and gold. Big fan. Interestingly, my degree is actually in human services. So when I was in high school, I was hospitalized as a kid with some different complications, and my mom calls me the $1 million baby. I had a lot of different health issues as a young person. And so by the time I got to high school, everyone's like, she's got her head on straight. She knows exactly what she wants to do. And the idea was to be a child life specialist. And for anyone who maybe doesn't know, child life specialists will sit next to a child in a hospital, typically those who are in long-term or critical care, and they're focused on the social emotional of the child. So you have the nurses, and a child life specialist might use a doll and golf balls and explain to a child in an age appropriate manner what's going on with their body. And a lot of times, kids who are in long term care, their families might not be able to be there with them all the time, especially maybe not both parents or a family member. And so the child life specialist is that person that's checking in on the kid on a regular basis. So that was my undergrad, and then right after college I got married, and my husband's degree was in chemistry, and I was like, well, my degree is human services. I can work wherever there's humans, right? Um, but to be a child life specialist, you have to get a master's degree. So the intent was always, I'll go back and get a master's at some point in time. And in high school, the really like deep part of me that I think shaped a lot of who I am, and one of the things I talk about when there's speaking opportunities is empathetic leadership. When I was 16, my stepdad committed suicide, and he came into my life when I was 11. So I had been, raised by a single mom up until about 11, was able to gain some sisters through marriage, and really had this, father figure in my life for some very crucial years from 11 to 16. And he was brilliant, genius, working on his master's, retired Navy, and just had some really strong mental health issues that he was going through. And that was a point in my life where I realized at a young age how quickly things can change and how short life really is. And ultimately, it was kind of already there, being a kid with a single mom and kid from divorce, of cherishing the relationships and the opportunities that you have to meet people and have an impact, no matter how short that might be. And after that point, realizing I don't want to be the blocker of any opportunity that there is for relationship, connection, and just brightening someone's life, no matter how short that is. And and from there, growing into what I thought I wanted to do with my career, it's always been based around people, helping people, supporting people in some way, shape, or form, right? Kind of evolved from kids. I was given my first real leadership opportunity working for the YMCA, where I ran summer day camps and had phenomenal leadership that trusted a 24-year-old with hundreds of children. And we did day camps from 7 in the morning until 6:30 at night. And I was given the opportunity to bring in a bunch of 18 to 19-year-olds as camp counselors and invest in them to be the leaders of the kiddos as the director. And there's so many things I gleaned from that opportunity, but there's more kind of seeds along the way in the journey. But I think between my mom's grit as a single mom and a young single mom showing me the work ethic that led to parts of who I am today, and the adventure that came from getting to see and experience different parts of the world with my dad moving all around the place. And one of my favorites was actually getting to live in Guam for 4 months for a summer when I was in college. I was this close to dropping out of Purdue and just becoming an island girl. It was a phase.
That's a tough decision to make there, man.
Yeah.
Bridgette, you've had some really rich life experiences, which is awesome. As a kid, you and I had very different outlooks, I think. I see you as someone who really enjoyed bringing out the best in others. I get a giggle out of hearing your story about you being a counselor and a leader with the YMCA, and you're assembling, all of these young, up and coming, aspiring leaders, right? And you're investing in them. That definitely was not me growing up at 24. And so kudos to you for having your head on straight for that. There was a point in my life, Bridgette, where someone literally had to sit me down and really had a, I don't know. I don't want to say maybe it was a come to Jesus moment talk with me, where they really just had to level set my life with me, right? And give me some accurate expectations of what this life was about. Even in my early 20s, I feel like I still had so much growing up to do. Was there a point in your life, in your your young adulthood, where you feel like the younger version of you needed to hear something that now today's version of you can now say, right, and impart that wisdom on other up and coming leaders or on other successful women? What was that thing that you needed to hear when you were young?
So when I was young, I think the thing that I needed the most was people to tell me that I was doing a good job, right? Like that affirmation
Mm,
of and I had some great counselors and teachers and older adults that kind of poured into my life that I think really spoke to that. Like, I can do this, I can achieve. Especially growing up really poor, there's this like grit that you want to achieve, right? And continuing to strive forward. But I would say as a young person, because when I was 16, after a lot of that change in my life, I essentially started living on my own when I was 16. So I was going to school, I was on dance team, I was in a dance company, and I worked 3 jobs, not just through high school, but then also into college. And I think I had one amazing person who was like, it's okay to slow down. And I think even now as an adult, I struggle. What people will be like, you need to relax. I'm like, what is that? I don't know how to do that. I think that I love that question because it's not one I've really had or thought deeply about before, but I think ultimately some of the things that I needed then, I still need now. And what I've learned at this stage in life, because I'm a mom to 3 young kids, and I grew up an only child, so I'm like, I don't know how to raise siblings. Um, interactions and all of that. There's a lot of things at this point in my life, and we're not given a handbook on parenthood.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Some of the things that I maybe needed as a 7-year-old, I need to tell, 35-year-old Bridgette that the inner 7-year-old or the 16-year-old or the 11-year-old and have some come to Jesus moments with those versions of myself today and be able to like have healing in some of those really hard things for myself because outward it's a lot it's easy for me to outwardly express grace and empathy and things like that for others, and it's a lot harder for myself. So I think when you ask the question of what do women and entrepreneurs need to hear, and I would say especially if they're mothers, giving yourself grace. And it's so
Hmm.
much easier said than done. I am not saying I have it right, but I think there's a lot of self-doubt, mom guilt, imposter syndrome that comes with being a female leader, and then the mom guilt specifically with being a hustler and also in the throes of motherhood.
Boy, what a complex balancing act, right? But I love that advice. Give yourself some grace. That is powerful. As I think back about my journey in leadership, Bridgette, and I think about, my experience initially leading a team, that was that first hire, that first key hire that I had to make as a leader, as a CEO. And it was a tough one. It took me a while. I really deliberated quite a bit. I went through a number of candidates and I finally made it. Long story short, it was a great hire, best hire I can make. I learned a ton from just making sure that, we selected the right team members going forward after that. But if you were to think back in your journey as a CEO, as a business leader, to your first key hire, were there some lessons that you gleaned from that experience and going through that process? You knew that this hire really was incredibly important to your organization. You knew that they were going to set the tempo in a lot of different facets of the business, and you just knew that you had to get this one right. Tell us about that experience and some of the wisdom that you were able to pull out of that experience.
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing that I've learned in a high growth scaling organization is that a key hire for a certain point in time might not be the same key hire as you continue to scale and grow. Um, and the reality of a high growth organization is being really mindful of the opportunities that you present. I love bringing in people who have little experience or like formal education and teaching and providing opportunity to learn and grow with us. So I would say when I think back to like the first hire that I made specifically into iCopy that was able to like operationally take some things off my plate, I went in with a lot of like whimsy and stars in my eyes of like this person's gonna grow up through the organization, and they're no longer with the organization today,
Mm.
But the role that they filled at the time, it was life-changing for me because I was doing so many things, and it was that first move of being able to take stuff off of my plate and really move into working on the business and not in the business. Over time, as I've had to make multiple strategic hires, being able to be really mindful as soon as possible about their strengths and weaknesses and providing opportunities to stretch and grow, especially in a high growth company. Ideally, you've got people who are able to be promoted and move through leadership positions really, really quickly, which is not necessarily the case in other organizations. And interestingly, I think that's something that we're going to be looking at in general in the insurance industry because there's so many people retiring now and over the next 10 years. And so you've got this younger generation that is going to be in a leadership role or the opportunity to be in a leadership role maybe 5 to 10 years ahead of their predecessors because of all of the openings that are there. So the big aspect for me is making sure that they're going to set the tone, but also as the CEO and the leader of the organization, making sure they're given the tools to be empowered, not only to set the tone, but lead in a way that's the culture that you want within the organization and provide them opportunities to learn and grow. The thing I don't like is when people don't want to invest in their people for fear of them leaving. And my thing is like, I will be thrilled and happy for you to move on to anything where you will thrive as an individual because it's truly living that people first aspect of our values.
Absolutely. And you really have to trust the people that are on your team. It's being able to trust them, being able to instill in them some sort of sense of investment, right? That they are a part of this organization, their DNA is a part of this organization. They have ownership over certain aspects of this organization are going to keep them loyal to that organization, right? And so when you invest in them, it just solidifies all of the things that you say with your actions, right? And we've all heard that saying, actions speak louder than words. There's nothing better than taking the time and the resources to invest in your team. And in my opinion, can be a very potent tool to creating long-lasting loyalty with your team. So very, very well said. Bridgette, as a company in the insurance industry, a lot of verticals are managed in cost through statutory or regulatory fee schedules, right? And so there's not a whole lot of difference in terms of the cost from one service to another. And really, oftentimes, key differentiators end up being customer service or customer relations oriented aspects to your business, right? I've seen a lot of businesses really, adopt this customers always right mentality, which I think is mostly great, right? But then there are times where sometimes the customer is actually not right. And they just need some education and some context to help get them, on the same page, right? So that they can make a value add informed decision about whatever the subject matter might be. As a business leader, from your perspective, share with us your journey in drawing that line between setting high customer service standards with your organization and being taken advantage of by a customer, right? So where do you draw that line and how do you navigate those complex sensitive waters in your business day to day?
Yeah, I would say it it gets escalated with what we do because oftentimes if a record is needed and it's a fire drill situation, people are hot, they're tense, they're stressed, and it's really easy to point the finger at us as the vendor when sometimes there are things within the process that genuinely are out of our control, right? We've done all the things right on our end, but we are also dealing with other third parties, with medical facilities, with custodians. and transfer of information. And so the number one thing for those who are interacting on a client standpoint is that education piece. They're going to come in hot. Like if they're coming in hot for something, we understand the pressure that they're under. And it's our job to inform them of where we're at in the process. Like, here is all the information, and give them the information and then see where it settles. I would say the education piece is so important because also we intentionally have humans in the loop in places where some of our competitors don't, which also means that I'm very honest that we're not always going to bat 1,000, but if we don't bat 1,000, we're going to be honest, open, transparent, and own it and make it right in whatever way that makes sense for the customer, if needed or necessary, which doesn't happen very often. But when it does, one of our values as an organization is generosity. So if we need to make something right, we're not just making it right to the bare minimum, we're being generous through that and making sure that we're communicating any level of excellence that maybe needs to be put in place. And sometimes that's not just on us. Sometimes it's on a process of communication that maybe a client needs to employ so that we can avoid things like that in future. And we are very honest about that so that it's a two-way street of communicating. I will say, outside of kind of like workflow process things, another big one for me that is a hard line is character. It costs you nothing to be kind. And it can cost an individual a lot when you are rude and unkind. And so there have been instances where folks have handled a situation where I understand you are hot and you are stressed, and it is valid to come with, questions, but to treat people poorly, I draw a line. And so there have been instances where I have had to speak to clients directly and be like, this is unacceptable. And if this behavior or this way of communication continues, your business is not welcome here.
I love that you said two things. One is that you were honest about the fact that there is no such thing as perfection. I've done a lot of finalist interviews at RFPs for public sector entities as well as for private sector entities. Some of the larger folks will have formal RFP processes for, certain services that they procure. And one of the things that I was always very careful to talk about is if things fall through the gaps, here is our response to that. You're setting appropriate expectations and you're helping the client understand that you acknowledge that you are not going to bat 1,000 every single time. We're people, we're imperfect, right? And therefore, we are going to come across a situation where we're going to have to enact plan B, right? We're going to have to respond to an issue where something fell through the gaps. And I love that you're so transparent and honest about that, because I think that breeds trust with clients. And I think that sets appropriate expectations. You know what? They're not always going to get it right, but if something does happen, I can trust that they're going to handle it with integrity and with honesty and transparency. I love that. The second thing that you said was the fact that sometimes as a business owner, you have the difficult task of identifying which clients just may not be a good fit for you, right? As a business. In my leadership journey, I have had the terrible pleasure of firing some clients. And sometimes you have to do that because either it's just not a good pairing, right? Solution to the need. Alternatively, there could be a situation where you just have a client that is just not willing to be kind and courteous, right? When needed. And in that case, you do need to become maybe not mama bear and papa bear to your employees, but certainly become that sound of reason, right? And that barrier between what could be potentially mentally harmful, right? You never know what somebody's going through in their personal life. And the last thing they need is to be treated unkindly at work or unkind at work. So I love that you said those two things. In your journey as a leader, Bridgette, has there ever been a failure or a moment of friction that you can think back on that actually turned out to be a breakthrough, right? A very wise man told me when I was younger, Carlos, the bigger the setback, the bigger the comeback. And man, that always got me fired up. And it probably pertains more so to sports than anything else. But has there ever been something in your professional life that you can think back on, either a failure or a moment of friction, something that you thought, man, this is just impossible to deal with, that actually ended up turning into something very positive, into a breakthrough of sorts?
Yeah, I had an organization where I was building and head of sales, but I was not, I had layers above me. And I was traveling when we were coming up on a quarterly goal. And I had a manager that put something in the system knowing that there is a policy for refund because people were wanting to make monthly and quarterly bonuses. It helped me as an individual, but it helped a bunch of other people. And it was done under my name, essentially within my location, but I was not the one who did it. Um, and that was a friction point for me of what am I gonna do with this? And it ended up being a situation because it was levels above me that I wasn't able to, let's just say, whistleblow. And so my response was to leave. And I was a very young leader at the time. And I think that's something that I look back now as a CEO and leader of my own organization that kind of haunts me a little bit. That I
Hmm.
my response was ultimately leaving. I will not stand for this. I will not be a part of it. But to not be able to have the impact at that level to make a difference when there was something that I knew wasn't being done with integrity, that as I lead within my organization, I want to make sure that people have a voice, they have an opportunity to make a difference no matter where they're at within an organization, especially if there's something that's going on that shouldn't be, because that was a very, very difficult place to be as, let's call it like a middle manager position.
So, Bridget, is there a leadership truth that, in your experience or in your journey, has taken you a little bit longer to embrace as a leader? For me, it was the concept that, I didn't need to know everything, that I didn't need to be an expert in every aspect of my business. That took me a long time to really internalize and really, quite honestly, really embrace, because I definitely have a piece about me, an attribute about me that requires at least some sort of understanding, right? And so it gives me a sense of knowing where I'm going. It gives me a sense of knowing how to react or how to respond. If I am not an expert in certain things, it makes me feel a little bit uneasy. It makes me feel a little bit like I don't know how to respond to that. So that aspect of leadership has really taken me a long time to embrace. It's actually quite freeing once you embrace it, right? That you don't need to be an expert in anything. But is there an example like that in your journey of leadership, Bridget, it just took you a little bit longer, to really be comfortable with that truth?
Yeah, I relate a lot to the one that you're talking about. I think the one that comes to mind for me. So a big part of my journey, I didn't grow up in a Christian home, and I came to faith when I was 16, and there's a lot of things that like culturally come from Christianity that have also impacted my leadership. And I would say one that this is probably going to sound really silly. It sounds that took a long time for me to really figure out how to implement well. People use it all the time, but maybe don't realize it comes from the Bible is treat others how you want to be treated, right? The
Mm.
golden rule. The difference over time is realizing that literally, right, treat others how you want to be treated is not the intent of the meaning in practice. It's really treat others how they want to be treated and learning, right? This goes into empathetic leadership and really looking at different tools that I think are pretty common in professional culture around culture index and personality traits. And in the Christian communities, a lot of people will talk about the five love languages, right?
Mm.
Within a professional setting, I think it's taking me too long. Like I wish it was a shorter journey. And understanding the importance of having culture pieces from the onset in regards to when you're recruiting and when you're onboarding, each individual's personality and communication styles, and taking it upon ourselves as the leaders or the managers within our organization to learn other people's communication styles. And uh, honestly, I've learned a component from knowing that whatever or however I would communicate something or I would want something done doesn't have to be the way that it's done. Running it through, and this comes from, being the one who's driving the culture, driving the voice, driving the tone. And oftentimes having people be like, okay, well, learning how to do social media posts with this certain tone, or
Mm-hmm.
even
Mm-hmm.
internal and external email communications. I like a little bit more like personality and fluff. And there are folks who are very direct and like, I'm not being rude, I'm not being any certain way. And just learning those things and putting things in place up front to learn them, to have really solid common ground, because how I want to be treated is not how somebody else wants to be treated, is not
Mm.
how someone else best communicates, not how best someone else learns. And employing that throughout an organization and as a leader uh, has taken me a little longer, and I still have more to learn and grow in that for sure.
That is so cool that you've taken such an eternal and profound truth and found a way to apply it in a business setting. And you hit the nail on the head 100%. Just because you would do things a certain way doesn't make other ways less effective or less valuable. And sometimes it's really empowering those team members, right, to do it their way, even though you might do it a little bit differently, giving them that empowerment, that authority, if you will, again, is another investment, right? You're filling their cup, you're filling their bucket, so that when you need to make a withdrawal, you've got those reserves already in there. You've got that goodwill because they trust you and you trust them. And I love the way that you apply that to the eternal truth of the golden rule. So, as I mentioned earlier, I really hope that some of the young female aspiring leaders, aspiring business owners that are watching this are able to pull away a ton of inspiration. You're such a delightful person to talk to. If you were face to face with someone that you're mentoring, specifically a female that is wanting to start her own business, right? And if you were in front of her right now, what do you think the top one or two pieces of advice that you would give her? What are those two things that you would offer?
Before you build a business plan and a financial breakdown, any of that, determine your why. Know your
Mm,
why and know your end game. So,
mm,
why are you starting? Why are you here? What's the purpose? And what is the end game? I think that, especially entrepreneurs, we tend to move the goalpost on ourselves. We're achievers, right? And making sure that from the beginning you know the why and you know the end game, it'll help you with your guardrails throughout the process of entrepreneurship. That doesn't mean that it can't change and evolve over time, right? If you're in business for 10, 15, 20 years, I'm not the same person I was 10 years ago, which means my why and my end game might naturally evolve. But then you also
mm-hmm,
have to have some time carved out, whether that's annually, every 3 years, to reevaluate.
mm.
Okay, this was my why, this was my end game, this is where I am today. Has it changed? And continue to make sure that you're putting that accountability in place for yourself.
That's fantastic advice. As a business owner, I'm not sure if you've ever contended with this. I certainly have over the course of my leadership journey, and that is managing burnout, right? And managing mental fatigue. Getting home and you're just like, I don't even want to watch TV. Like my brain literally feels like mush right now. I just feel like I've been in a 15 round boxing match and I am just depleted in every aspect of the word. What advice would you give to those aspiring leaders that may be dealing with, burnout or maybe managing through an episode in their career that is bringing them pretty darn close to it, right? What guidance would you offer to them?
Oof, I mean, I feel like I need someone to tell me what guidance they would offer. So I would say it's a constant journey, especially depending upon what season of life you're in, because, our most precious resource in this life is time. And oftentimes a stem of that burnout is feeling like you have a lack of time in the areas of
Mm,
life that bring you the most joy or that you want to be spending that precious resource in. So really taking time, which is hard for most entrepreneurs to take time to slow down for anything for themselves, right? Doing that first thing is really difficult. So
mm,
I recognize that it is difficult and plan and analyze. You do that really well in your business or whatever it is that you're leading, and doing it for yourself is hard. And maybe you need someone. Maybe you need a little body double. You need a mentor, or just a friend to be like, okay, here are the things right
mm,
now that are sucking my soul and energy. Like, what are the things that are dragging you down? And then what are the things that you are finding are filling your cup? And oftentimes
mm,
you need to look at as an entrepreneur the things that are filling your cup that are not in your business. Because I think our brains, and maybe this isn't true for everyone, go to what are your tasks, what are your duties that you enjoy in your role? And that's one thing, and that's fine. But what about in your personal time,
mm,
which you're probably not taking, which is
mm-hmm.
probably why you don't know what happens in your personal time that gives you joy or fills your cup. So if you took the time to do that and have those things, what would it be? And for me, it's time with friends. I am a big quality time gal. And I really enjoy experiences. And often that can be super easy and like a good Thai place. Like, give me some good food, a nice
Mm,
cocktail or mocktail. Like, I love something new, like some sort of experience that can include like good company, food, and ambience. It's just not that difficult, but the difficult part is making the time when you've got the business and family
mm.
priorities to say, no, it's okay. I'm not going to feel bad about going out with my girlfriends for a couple of hours or whatever it is.
Very, very wise advice, I have to say. You seem too young to be able to give that type of advice.
That's why I started with, I think I need someone else to tell me also, like, there's give me all the advice, please.
Well, you know what's funny is that as we're talking about truths that we have a hard time embracing as leaders, I feel like, yeah, there's this sense that as a leader, you can't take that time to level set. You can't take that time to be healthy mentally because your employees or your team has to see you as the hardest working person in the business, which I don't know if those two things are the same thing, right? You can still be the hardest worker in the business and not be falling apart from a mental health standpoint because you are being responsible with your own health. You're being responsible with your limitations, with your capacity. And that, at least, as I'm hearing you talk, has definitely been another truth that I have had a hard time really embracing as a leader, and really just putting that in your back pocket and being able to sit on that and being able to embrace that fact is going to make you such a better leader at the end of the day because you're going to have so much more clarity. You're going to have so much more confidence, right? And stability in your own mental frame that when it's time to make those high pressure decisions, and you know what I'm talking about, Bridgette, sometimes you got to make tough decisions as a business owner, decisions that really are going to make a big impact on your business overall and on your team. And so you've got to come to the table with a clear mind. You've got to come to the table with, a stable frame that beyond a shadow of a doubt, the decision that needs to be made and you're able to make it as the CEO or as the business leader. And when you don't have that stability, when you don't have that clarity of mind, it it becomes a much more dangerous decision to make at that point, right? So anyway, great advice. Very, very wise on your part.
I'm feeling a bit of like conviction there. I've had a lot of people recently be like, you really need to do like I think it's called the miracle morning or something like that.
Mm,
Um, where a lot of people say like, get up an hour before,
mm.
do, a workout, breath work, journal. But I am not a morning person, Carlos. I am a night owl. I will stay up and I enjoy like a solid 8 to 9 hours of sleep. And it's that one thing that I feel like is a very common advice for
Mm.
entrepreneurs and leaders is like your morning routine. And maybe I'll get there one day. That's the thing where I feel like it's a top advice from a lot of people and I'm like, okay, maybe that'll be the game changer for me in like 5 years. I can't make that commitment yet, but one day I'll get there.
We all got to have goals, right? We all got to have things that we are working on. Absolutely. But I like you, I'm not. I do my best work in the afternoon and the evening once I'm warmed up and once I've, drank 10 cups of coffee. I tend to be at my best at that point. But like you, I have heard of other leaders rave about how much more productive they are because they wake up, at 3 a.m., right? And I'm like, if I woke up at 3 a.m., I'd get like 4 hours of sleep, because I
Yeah.
go to bed so late.
Right. Or I would have to be in bed by 9, and that sounds terrible. I like wake up at 10 o'clock at night. I just went on a vacation with some girlfriends who are like so low key, and we're in like Marco Island, Florida. And I was like, wait, everything shuts down at 10 o'clock? Like, that's when I wake up. What am I gonna do?
That is so funny. That is so funny. So as we're thinking about mindsets, right, and as we're thinking about just our mental frame, was there anything, Bridgette, that in your leadership journey, right, as you're really climbing this conceptual ladder to the C-suite, was there a shift in your mindset that helped you to level up? In other words, is there advice that you would give these young leaders, right, that if there were a switch to flip, that's hard to say. If there were a switch to flip in their minds, which one should they flip so that they could be more effective at leveling up as a CEO?
Hmm. Well, I think I can speak to high growth, high velocity CEOs because that's the pace that I live in, and not everybody lives there. And I want to make that distinction because I do think it is different when you are growing and scaling at a more consistent or maybe slower pace than the high growth that I have done in multiple organizations now. So as a growth strategist, my number one thing is high growth and high velocity. And I think that the biggest mindset shift, especially because being like a 0 to 1 builder and then having um, to delegate and figure out how to move from being a doer within a growing and scaling business and then moving to working on the business. A lot of that comes with being able to delegate to those who can execute. I think with a lot of C suites who have to go through quick evolution of their org chart, their organization, their leaders, being able to delegate effectively and be okay with a certain percent margin of
Hmm.
error. So this is the thing that I talk to the operations team about is like there is a percent of error that I am willing to sacrifice for velocity. And we will learn from our mistakes. And so that's why I think that the response is maybe not relevant for those who aren't growing quickly, but for me, being able to have just enough information to make decisions really quickly, because so often you can get stuck in decision fatigue, especially when you
Mm.
have to make really high level, big decisions that have a potential really large impact, depending upon what you decide, right? And the fear, the worry, or the anxiety of an outcome that you don't have a crystal ball for can be paralyzing. And ultimately, for me, figuring out who I can delegate to, retrieve information that I need, being data driven in as much of my decisions as possible, and also having a percent margin of failure and communicating effectively to the team that failure isn't bad and that failure, quote unquote, isn't always failure in the traditional sense. It's really a learning opportunity. It's a growth opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And when you've got an organization that, you know, has 6, 7 layers deep, right? There's people within the organization that I don't know super well, right? Like I'm not interacting with them, but making sure that there is that culture as a leader, if that is a part of your decision or your growth, that you do have safety and systems and communication and processes, the mistakes are going to happen. And let's make sure that they're learning opportunities to make sure that we grow that much faster on the other side of an experiment. Because
Mm.
sometimes it's an experiment.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. You've got to have a certain degree of tolerance for mistakes, right? When you don't have that flexibility, the work environment becomes very rigid, very stressful, very tense. And quite honestly, I think it snuffs out innovation. You know, innovation includes making mistakes, it includes learning from those mistakes, right? And applying the lessons that you learn from those things that ultimately end up being failures that help propel you to the next level as a business. So, very, very, very well said. So this podcast is called Live Lead Legacy, Bridgette. If if your team were to look back on working with you as a leader, as a person, what do you hope that they would say? Right? You're not around anymore. You retire. You've been hugely successful. Everybody has made a ton of friends, a ton of money, and everybody's happy, all the happier for it. But what do you hope when your team looks back on this season with you? What do you hope they say?
At the end of the day, the things that I want to be known for are being kind, generous, and leading with legacy in mind. So I love the podcast being Live, Lead, Legacy, right? Legacy is a big one that is a core value to our family. So when I'm thinking through everything that I do as a leader, it's about not just today, but 3 generations from now. Because I'm not going
Mm.
to know my grandkids' kids, probably. But it's not just me and my family unit. And with being a people first organization, understanding that the ripple effect of providing livelihood and a great platform in place for people to spend their time that also provides livelihood to their families, what does that look like? And so knowing that it's not always easy and people might not always agree with all of my decisions or hard choices that I have to make, but knowing that there is trust that my decisions are funneling through people first and the biggest impact of legacy possible with everybody that is able to be impacted within my circle or even, you know, They say 3 degrees of 3 degrees of separation is more like the insurance industry.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, everybody's connected somehow.
Yeah.
Bridgette, as we wind down today's conversation, by the way, thank you so much for being so generous with your time and with your insight. Is there a leadership challenge that you would issue to our listeners today? Something that they should try this week? Something that you say, let's make this call to action practical, and let's make it happen. Is there a challenge that you would issue to our listeners that they should try immediately to become better leaders?
I would say it goes back to what I would say to someone who's starting their own business. I think for everyone to take time to reflect on their why and their end game, no matter where they're at in their career or what position, is really important. I think there's a lot of opportunity, not only in the industry, but wherever you're at professionally. And too many people get stuck with fear in the unknown. And so if you're not happy, if you are analyzing kind of like what the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years of your career are going to look like, focus on your why and your end game and reverse engineer into a plan, path, or opportunity that's going to maximize your time and your joy in this life.
Well, thank you again. It's been a sincere pleasure chatting with you today. And thank you for being a guest on Live Lead Legacy. You certainly have offered, a hefty dose of inspiration and insight for leaders that are watching, and that are really honestly looking to level up. So thank you again. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
To our audience, be sure and connect with Bridgette on LinkedIn by clicking on the links in the description section of this podcast. Thank you again for joining us on Live Lead Legacy, where we explore the stories, strategies, and successes that inspire leaders to leave a lasting legacy. If you found value in today's conversation, don't forget to subscribe, leave us a review, and share this episode with someone who could use a little inspiration in their leadership journey. For more insights, resources, and updates, follow us on all of your major social media outlets: TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Until next time, remember, live with intention, lead with impact, and build a legacy that matters.